Now, some of you know McMillan World pretty well in there, and some of you are our guests today. It's great to see y'all. And in this time, like I said, we're going to kind of tell a part of the story that we're living in when we say beautiful thorns, like how that fits together with us. We'll talk about my words too, but how that all comes together. And I've for a lot of people, I've already shared of that, like what's been walking through our life, right? When I'm teaching or there, kind of application points and things whatever. But it'd be better for you to hear from her.
Okay, so we came here in 2013 as being called as the lead pastor at this church. At the time, we were meeting in a school, and we had really been working as a congregation toward getting a building on this piece of property. And in 2015, after a lot of prayer and a lot of hard work and a lot of generosity from our people, we started work. We broke ground on this piece of property in June of 2015. And then came September. In September of 2015, in August of 2015, I was in Louisiana for a 2-week hiatus to lesson plan because we homeschool, because why not add more to the insanity? And also because, as I lovingly told him, I can't miss you if we're never apart. So
she phrases that, yeah.
So we took a little break. I was with my sister, and they left Friday night in the second week. And I stayed behind and headed home on Saturday morning. And I'd really been spending a lot of time praying about our marriage. We are not those people that got married and it was like roses and sunshine. That is not our story. We are both very strong-willed. One of us more than the other. I won't tell you which one. It's me.
We're still working.
So we have butt heads a lot in our lives. That motor sound, by the way, that's my arm. Sorry about that. Unrelated to this story, I have one arm. This is my prosthetic. It makes sound. I'm trying to control it, but I'm not doing a very good job. So that Friday night, I remember I've been spending some dedicated time in prayer about us, and I looked at my sister and I said, he will never change, because he can't. Because the things that he's dealing with are hardwired into his brain, because they're family of origin things. Everybody has brokenness in their backgrounds, and whenever that brokenness happens in very young years, your brain actually hardwires in that way. So it has to be me. And by the grace of God, we came home. I came home in September, and God broke his brain quite thoroughly via a very massive brain tumor in the left side of his brain, almost the entire thing. And when it was discovered, his entire, so you have a midline in your brain, you have your left and your right, and his midline was all the way over here. It just was a mess, and it looked soupy is the way that I can describe it. The scans, I'd never looked at a brain scan prior to this, but I knew immediately that's not right. There should be a line and a side, and that's not there. And the doctor at the ER put his arms on my shoulders and looked me in my eyes and said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your husband has brain cancer, and we have to get him to a hospital now, like right now, or he's going to die. He's probably going to die anyway, but we have to go. So they loaded him into an ambulance and took him to a hospital, and then we were transferred to MD Anderson from there. And we have been living the brain cancer life for almost 4 years now, which for us is a grace, because that first night, every doctor we saw came in and said, tell him goodbye, and get your children and tell them to tell him goodbye too. He will not make the night. And then it was, he won't make the day, he won't make the week, he won't make the month, he certainly won't make the year. And there's no way that he will live for the next 2 or 3. And here we are almost 4 years in. And that brings us to today.
I don't remember much about that when she was talking about on those moments. I have little like pictures of like when we were in the middle of that, discovering where we were and where we were going. So yeah, it's been a story, more of a story than we ever had a plan at all here. A part of my issue, like being a pastor, part of my responsibility, my privilege is to stand before y'all and kind of talk about things. But one of the things that I lost is called aphasia, which, and some of y'all know that, reading, writing, speaking,
and comprehending,
and thinking, that's what
important.
I lost in that thing. So, how do we walk through that? But that's been part of the story. And so, what we want to kind of share, that's kind of the intro point of where we came from in the last couple of years. Some of you were there. Like when everything happened, you were in the hospital that day. And some of you, this is the first time you're hearing things like, wow, we came to a church and the pastor's broken. And that, welcome to Cross Lake here in this. But part of this, we want to continue to share kind of what God's been doing in us. So right before resurrection, a couple of weeks ago, I was getting ready. I was looking through the passages and remembering like various, just looking in New Testament, like what can I say this time? And I got to 2 Corinthians, and if you were here for resurrection, I was talking about the new creation that God has given. So when I was getting ready for that, I kind of said, I want to look around at 2 Corinthians and really see how that all fits together. And I was in the middle of that. I was sitting over there working on this, and God brought me directly here. And we're going to kind of look at this together in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. So God said, this is your life, Jesse. And it was like Jackie was at her desk and Brian was back here. I was like, God is showing me that this is my life. And they were like, okay, in there. So, but in that, it was just like a big moment for me of God saying, hey, here's how you move forward. Because I've struggled a lot of how to move forward because I'm a dreamer. And when I walked into this building or into this property, when I was deciding whether or not this was the right path, and I was praying over that, those geese out there, and some of y'all heard this before, like geese flew over me, and it was like, what could happen in this space is unbelievable, and I want to be a part of that dream. I'm a dreamer in this, but then cancer, and I can barely speak clearly. Reading's been hard. Like how in the world, how does that fit together here in light of that? And this is a huge passage that God kind of put towards me and Ashley, and we'll kind of make that all connect hopefully in this. So here's what the passage, if you have your Bible, you can look here or you can look up there. This is what he says to Paul in this sense. So to keep me from becoming conceited, so Paul is saying about his life, so that Paul wouldn't become conceited, which excessively proud of oneself. And so again, God used this passage over Jesse, and he said, in the same way that I did this to Paul, Jesse, you should recognize this, because of the surpassing greatness of revelation. So Paul had been given visions of the ability to see and understand the Bible and what Jesus had done. He was pouring that out. And God said, hey, in light of the level that I'm bringing you up so that you can see the beauty of the gospel, all of this, I'm going to help you in a way you're not going to feel helped in that way. And that's the next piece in this. He says, in this, a thorn was given me in flesh. So some people with Paul, sometimes they think that like they couldn't see. Like right now, if my life depended on telling who you are, I can't see you at all right there. So I couldn't imagine living in that way. And some people think that. There's other things that Paul struggled with or whatever. What was that thorn in the flesh? We don't really know, but a thorn was given me in the flesh, a message of Satan. Oh, that sounds bad. To harass me, to keep me from being conceited. So yeah, there's your pastor that God has poured cancer in my life to keep me from being conceited in the church. But you know what? When you say, God, I'm giving you my life, he says, okay, get ready. I love you so much, and I love the mission that he's called towards, that I will utilize your life in ways that you couldn't plan yourself, but I'm going to plan your life. That's what God does in us. And so my thorn in that moment, it's not the only thorns. I've got a lot of other thorns, but they leveled up in there. And I would say the biggest thorn I've got is living in brain cancer in there. So I've had three brain surgeries, chemo, radiation, and ridiculous meds, which I'm on those today in that. But that's been just part of that thorn, of that kind of living in that. And there's been a lot of moments where I've struggled, and right after my friend Tim, I've mentioned Tim before because he's like my brother. Right after the first surgeries that I was recovering on that, Tim would call me every day to encourage me, because just managing in brain world was really, really, really hard. And there's crazy meds, there's all kinds of stuff. But I dealt with depression in a huge level. And that was the time, if those of you who were here, I didn't teach for a while, and Brian and Fred, they kind of filled that space, did a great job. And I was standing out there, and I was sometimes playing some music, but that's about as I could give at that time. But part of that was kind of just walking. So that thorn, there's so many angles that I could talk, and I don't want to spend all the time, but it's been a hard thorn. Last week, the week before, I just kind of share life. We're transparent as a church. Like I legitimately were in my closet in the dark crying. Dudes don't cry, come on. But just emotion. And I don't know why, but my brain is broken. So I live in the world. So I teach and I pour everything into Sundays. And then this afternoon, I'm going to sleep for 3 hours or whatever. So that thorn is hard, and it's constant in that. And I don't say with the point of, y'all should, what's that? Pity. Yeah, I'm not asking that, so you should feel. I would say, man, that's my real thorn. That's what I'm sharing. I'm like in the church saying, man, this is what it looks like. And I'm a lot of times saying, okay, God, how do you use that? Because I look at this and I'm like, I could have done such better job, but this is the thorn. And so that's in my world. But when we talk about McMillan family, we have different thorns.
When we were talking through this, and he initially came to me around Easter and had said he walked into our bedroom and he climbed into bed. He was like, Ashley, this passage, it's my life. And
the thorn of the
I was looking at him like he was nuts, because he was presenting it to me as though it was new information. And I have dwelt in this passage so fervently for the past 3.5 or 4 years. Now, he has what we call a remembery problem. And so he can't really track. His brain won't allow him to remember these things until you start talking about them, and then he goes, aha. And so we laid in bed that night and just started really talking about what God was doing here and what he wanted us to do with this passage, and that's how this situation was born. And as we talked through it and prayed through it and kind of gave our different insights, to it, he got to this passage, and I told him what had really been prevalent to me about it, and he told me what had really been prevalent to him about it. And for him, when he read it, he read the 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, and immediately he went to Gethsemane, to Christ, repeating over and over again, take this. If it's your will, take this. If it's your will, take this. And whenever he was telling me that, I was like, oh, isn't that me? I have a friend who lives in Switzerland now, and whenever she contacts me out of the blue, she says this to me: how was Gethsemane today, friend? Because I've told her I dwell so much in Gethsemane, in the depths, in a season of lament. I honestly don't know if it will ever end. And that's okay. So for me, my thorn, his thorn is bearing the weight of the actual brain cancer. It means something so different to him. And for me, it's bearing the weight of the people that will be left behind. It's trying to figure out what we're supposed to do to walk wisely. It's trying to love him really well as he is. I tell him frequently that he has the gift of not remembering nothing that happened in our past. He remembers none of it. None of it. I remember all of it. So he'll be doing something that is absolutely ridiculous, and it's very hard for me to detach and go, he has no idea. Like, he has no memory of this. He doesn't know that we've already done this 15 times today and, 1,000 times in our marriage. That's the way that God broke his brain. It's been a test in patience. I tell people that I prayed for patience in 9th grade, and I got Jesse, and then I got...
He answered you.
He did.
Yeah.
You pray for patience, he gives you hyperactivity to test it. So, I've been convinced for a very long time that, especially in America, we simply do not know how to grieve. We don't know how to rest in a season of lament and let that be okay. And we don't know how to come alongside somebody who's struggling with loss, who's struggling with death, who knows the full measure of the words, this life is temporary. And we don't know how to just live in that. And more than that, we don't know how to maintain hope in that, because death is so final in our mentalities. It's so final. I want to read about Jesus in Gethsemane. What resonates with me so much is that he's so terribly human. Like, this is Jesus, he's God, he knows this isn't the end, and still he is face down in the earth, sweating blood, begging that he not have to die a physical death, that he not have to suffer the separation from his Father. It's significant. It's a big deal that Jesus does that. And a great hope to us, because when I read that, I go, it is well. It is well. Though our bodies waste away, though Jesse's body, it would appear, is wasting away faster than a lot of people's at a much younger age, it's not the end. It is simply not the end.
Yeah. So it's interesting because in this story that we walk through, for me, God is, really, I'm trying to figure out the thorn, but there's not been a point of, I've been pleading to not have the thorn in that way, but in her, it's like, God, move this away. It's different, but the same thing, in the same phrase, in all that. And this is where the passage just really pushed into me in this here. But he said to me, so God said this directly to Paul and to us all in this, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And part of me that's been so funny for y'all is I've had so much more conversations that people have said that pours into their life than I ever had before cancer. It's like I became a better pastor by stinking all the time at what I do. And you're like, no, I'm like, I listened to a sermon that I preached before all this recently. I was like, man, who's that guy? I was listening to that because I'm not the same, but in that sense, I get to this passage and what God said directly to Paul, my grace, his grace in this that he has poured into my life is sufficient. It's enough. I don't need anything else, but I want everything. No. Your sufficient is for my power, and God's power is made perfect in our weakness. Well, a lot of times we're taught that backwards, right? Like, show your strength, But God says, no, it's flip-flopped. The weaker you are, trusting him, the stronger you are through his power. And I've seen that, but I haven't experienced that nearly until this beautiful thorn and walking through that, because God's power is made perfect in those weaknesses. And I say that to us as well, as no matter where we are in that. On that.
So for clarity's sake, I'm going to explain some clinical things about how his brain works. This is very complex, so I'm going to keep it just as simple as I can. The left side of the brain affects the right side of the body. So if you've been here long enough, you've perhaps seen him seize. Or
they all
sort
saw
of,
it. I
most
see
of the time he just
ago.
kind of shifts his weight onto his left leg, and that's because he has this electrical pulse sensation that goes down his body, kind of an extreme version of when your foot falls asleep and it wakes up, all down his right side. The other thing that seizures do for him is that because they originate out of several places in his brain, but primarily out of the part of his brain that controls his speech. So when he has a particularly significant seizure, he loses the ability to speak. So aphasia, which he's had since the beginning, impairs his ability to hear and process and regurgitate information with any kind of speed. We've learned that he can understand it, but it may be delayed. Maybe a week later, he'll come and say, oh, okay, I understand that. It takes his brain a long time to connect the dots. When he first was diagnosed, he couldn't speak at all. He was speaking gibberish, which is how we ended up in the ER in the first place, because I thought he was extraordinarily dehydrated. So when we got the initial results, it was obvious to me that, oh, this is why he can't speak. And he would lay in the hospital bed when we got to MD Anderson, and the only thing that he could remember, the only thing that he could say, they were numbers. And so his name became 21381, which is his birthday. The children were their ages. They were, I can't remember how old they were right now. And he could remember my name. Everything else spilled out in a series of syllables and consonants that made just absolutely no sense. And that is why the initial doctor told us that there was nothing that they could do, that the answer was to put him to sleep and just remove the whole left side of his brain. He would still be alive. He would basically be a walking silent vegetable, incapable of understanding anything, but he would live. And there was this moment where she was sitting on the foot of his bed, and I was sitting in the uncomfortable plastic green recliner, and I was looking at him, and I saw in his face the look of panic. And I said, that's not what's going on. He understands you. He just can't speak. But he knows what you're saying, and he's back there. And she was like in one motion. She's so exhausted, from me, because apparently I'm feisty. I didn't know that until he was diagnosed. So she turned in an exasperated way and pulled a pen out of her pocket. And she looked over at
I
him
love
and
that
she
pen.
said, "What's this?" And he,
Oh, it was like Everest, but I got it. The
pen.
pen. And she was like, I still remember all
And she
that.
pointed to her watch and said, "What's this?" And he
It was
said,
like, what,
wristwatch. It
yeah.
was wristwatch, big word. And she turned and, okay, I don't know. Maybe we wait. Maybe we wait and see. And that has been our story for 4 years. When he was initially diagnosed, because the tumor was so massive, and his tumor is not, when people hear brain tumor, they think a ball. You go in, you scoop that out. If you have to take some brain with it, it's fine. You pull the whole thing out. And that is actually not what his tumor is like. I tell people it's like if you took a tissue paper for gift wrap that's really, really thin, and you saturated it in water, and then said, okay, now separate the pieces. Good luck. It becomes all muddled together. And so his tumor is like that. And when they go in to try to do any kind of surgery, they're trying to figure out, like, oh, well, this cell might be tumor and that cell might be healthy brain. And so it's very, very complex. And because of that, he had so much tumor in the part of his brain that controls his speech and comprehension that he should not be able to speak still. They removed whole portions of his brain that control his speech and comprehension. And every time you go into a surgery, I mean, you have to sign your life away, and they tell you, we don't know what we're going to get, and, he might not make it through the surgery, but, I mean, it's highly unlikely that he will die in surgery. But when he comes out, again, he probably won't be able to speak. He probably won't be able to understand. He's not going to know who you are. And off you go. Because he has so much pressure in his brain, you can't do nothing. You must do something. So we send him off to the surgeries. And every single time, without fail, he has woken up talking. And every single time, the doctors have gone, okay. So when we say that God's power is perfect in our weakness, he doesn't need us to do what he's going to do. The thing that he does is speak. And the thing that he should not be able to do is speak. Power made perfect in weakness through brain cancer.
So it's God's story, and wherever we are, when we, as in him, recognize that God's grace upon us is sufficient. For my power in this, God saying, is made perfect in that. And we celebrate in the ability for me that I could talk at all in there, and then the other pieces in that. And part of me, when I think through that, I say, I can still speak. So what should I do in light of that, right? And that passage continues at that moment. In that, Paul said, therefore, in light of where I am, even in a thorn, therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses. Fred and Susan could tell you about, I still remember when we were on the phone together in MD Anderson for my first surgery, when someone was calling and praying for me to be healed in that moment. And listen, God can heal us in the middle of nowhere, and he can do unbelievable things. But God had really told me that he wasn't going to heal me. He was going to use this in my life. So there was, again, we could talk about so much that God poured into us, different angles in that. But I got really scared in that conversation, like ridiculously. I was on a lot of steroids, so I'll blame it on that for something. But because I knew God had said really clear, cancer's your life, and you need to, but healing it I'm scared of it. Now, I really was, God just showed in this. And in the same way, in this, therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness. Paul was saying, I say the same thing, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. I've experienced so much more of who God is and what he has done in my life because he just pours and rests us in my life. There are moments that Holy Spirit, it just settles me down because it's been one of those days. I don't really know how to describe that. And I bet you have things in Thorn, like when if you're a believer, that God has rested you in the good way, in that he's on that, rest upon, that the power of God has rest upon me. And so Paul is saying that. And then, I love this. Y'all know this about me, those of you here regularly, in the next passage. For the sake of Christ, in there, the purpose of Christ then. So we remember this, hopefully. The gospel is what he's talking about, the good news of who God is and what he has done. And in this, praise God, you use cancer when my brain blows up and I can talk about the gospel in more beautiful ways where people listening in a different angle, that I did nothing to accomplish it, but you gave me this so that, I'm getting fired up, for the sake of Christ, that God created the heavens and the earth and everything's perfect, but then we fell apart in that. But then Jesus showed up to rescue us in every way, and no matter what we have, cancer or whatever, no matter what we are walking in together, he has come to rescue us. And if we give our life and said, I want to follow the rescuer who has come, then we get saved, and then we have the opportunity to share with everybody else. God can save you. Man, the days right before first surgery, and I've said this before if you've been here, the 12 days they extended my first surgery, they went accidentally, didn't schedule appropriately, so I had to wait 12 days on crazy steroids and all that. But man, I lived in heaven for that time. It was not meds, maybe a part of meds, but part of that time I had the opportunity to share with people. Person after person after person after person after person, to share the beauty of God no matter what we walk through. And I still, it's the greatest vacation I've ever had in my life. I mean, I like our vacations. Yeah. Anyway, that was the greatest. It was so beautiful. And in this, I was content with weakness, insults, hardship, persecutions, and calamity. That's what Paul was saying. And I get it. I see that. And we walk in thorns in life. My encouragement is not to try to keep getting fixed on that. Maybe you can be healed, or maybe medical world can help. I'm not saying stop that, but I'm saying don't miss the opportunity that God has given you through the thorns in your life. No matter what. Is it easy? No, not at all. But is it powerful and beauty that God is pouring us? Yes. Yes. I constantly ask God, how can I use this? That I am wrecking in all kinds, more ways than y'all know, that I wreck in all, how do I use this? And he walks in that and he shows his beauty. And this is where the passage ends here. For when I am weak, this is Paul saying, and Jesse says it here. For when I am weak, then I'm strong. And that's all of us, wherever we are. For when I am weak, then I'm strong. I know, I'm going to do this. Let's say that together, okay? It's right up there. For when I am weak, then I am strong. When we recognize that weakness, gives us the room to let God pour into us as believers. Nothing Nothing is more beautiful than seeing that in that way. So at this point, part of that in that the beautiful of Thorns, Ashley's going to share.
In March of 2018, Jesse had his routine brain scans. When the images pulled up on the screen that day in his doctor's office, it was instantly evident to our eyes that his tumor had spread, crossing the boundaries of his midline and infiltrating the right side of his brain, something we had been fighting to keep from happening since his diagnosis in September of 2015. We were referred to our surgeon at MD Anderson for a follow-up scan and appointment there. This was a stealth MRI scan. It's a piece of equipment that gives clearer results, something we know from experience to be a precursor to a brain surgery. It would be his fourth. There are moments in this life, horrible, wonderful moments, that I would not give up, but I would also not want to relive. Sitting around our dining room table with our 4 kids, Jesse sleeping in our room from exhaustion, and telling them that their daddy was dying sooner than we had hoped. That is one of them. I do not shy away from the truth with them. This is their life, it's their father. And they need to know the truth about life and about death to understand the truth about who God is and who he is not. So I told them that their daddy's tumor had crossed the midline, that the cancer was likely in his spinal fluid. We talked about what they could expect his body to endure, about how he would probably lose his ability to walk, to speak, to think, and eventually to even remember them. We talked about how hard it is to watch him suffer, how hard it is to suffer ourselves. And then we talked about what a gift we've been given with the bonus days we've had with him, where he has been near, and mostly himself. We talked about how thankful we are that he had lived, really lived, and how incredibly grateful we are that we know our time with our daddy doesn't end when his body wastes away, because eternity together does not diminish in time. God has been merciful and gracious to us, granting us so much peace in the midst of so much sorrow, giving our children understanding well beyond their tender years. Afterward, we sent the kids to my parents' home for a week so we could make plans for Jesse's coming medical needs and for his funeral. They came home, we celebrated Easter, and then we planned a trip to get out of the house and live this life together. We had a month between the awful scans and the follow-up with the surgeon, so we took the kids to Enchanted Rock to hike around the smooth granite and run free in the open air. Put that up. I was walking a bit behind Jesse, watching him guide our 2 youngest down a steep slope. If you aren't familiar with Enchanted Rock, it is exactly what it sounds like, a big rock. A lot of big rocks, huge expanses of them, are smooth, with no interruption in the surface. But on the path I took, there was a crack, and in that crack was a tiny cactus. It was that big. And growing out of that cactus was an even tinier flower, thorns sticking out all around it. Beauty growing out of the dry and seemingly dead, I thought. When I saw it, a dream that felt more like a memory came rushing forward, and something I had read dozens of times over the past few months came alive to me. The passage about the thorn in the flesh. We returned home. I scuffed out a rough image of what was in my mind, and I put it aside. A little less than a month later, after Jesse's follow-up scan with MD Anderson had shown us that the tumor had not spread, as we had previously seen with the other piece of scanning equipment, and was, in fact, markedly better than before we went through radiation. I contacted a college friend of ours who's a gifted artist. I hadn't spoken to him in at least 15 years. Sorry, Sean. And still, I contacted him. I told him I wasn't sure exactly what this was for, but did he do commission work? And could he work with my poorly drawn out sketch to bring to life this image in my mind? We set up a phone conversation. I explained my thoughts. And a few days later, he sent me this completed image. And this is where it gets a little tricky. Unless you've lived alongside a terminal, incurable illness, this tends to be a difficult thing to understand, the way you learn to pray and the things that you come to understand about healing. For example, most people don't know and don't expect to find that our most fervent prayer in this is not that God would heal Jesse. We do ask for that. We do. But more than that, we ask to bear the wounding well. We were told so clearly that instantaneous and total earthly healing would not be our path, that we were to suffer and do what we can with our sorrow to bring people to Christ. It's just not our focal point, healing. We have spent nearly 4 years now holding fast to the knowledge that earthly healing is only temporary. Jesse healed of brain cancer here only means he will die later. Physical healing, it's a delay, not a deliverance. These bodies, they don't last. So we stopped spending time begging God to heal and started begging him instead to help us put to death every bit of our flesh for the sake of proclaiming his glory. It's the dead things that fertilize the soil and nourish the plants to help the flowers grow. 3 times, more than that, I pleaded with the Lord, take this from us. Heal him, God. What good is he to your kingdom dead in the ground? What love is this? Making children fatherless? And God answered with a tiny flower growing out of thorns in the middle of my wilderness as I watched a dying father guide his children down a steep path. My grace is sufficient. It is enough. It is abundant for you. Daily, still, I ask the Lord, God, if you're not going to remove this thorn, then use the parts of me that have to die to my own desires to fertilize this sorrow and grow hope. Make it a wounding that proclaims the beauty of God's glory. Daily I ask him, because daily I grieve and long for Jesse to be healthy. Daily I ache for our children. Daily I awaken to the throbbing pain of the thorn of my husband, this man whom I dearly love, dying of brain cancer. But when I wake up at 3 a.m, physically hurting from the emotional and mental long suffering, I think about my Jesus, who cried out in the garden to be free from the suffering he knew was coming. I think about the intensity of this human desire that he had to make the pain stop. And I think about his surrender to the life he was given and to the death he was to suffer. I remember how his willingness to wear a crown of thorns made the way for my own thorn to bloom hope instead of despair.